Hi everyone, my name's Jules Mayouf and we're going to showcase today 4 Vlieseline products in a nice little cushion project. So the centre part is going to be using the crash technique, and then we're going to use some wadding and do some extra embroidery on the wadding to make it a nice plump cushion, and then we're going to use our sewing skills to make an envelope back. So the Vlieseline products that we need to do the crash centre, we're going to use a product called Solufleece. This is a sew-in water soluble interfacing, and you can use this as well on things like machine embroidery and mini quilts. We're also going to use Bondweb, which is also called Vliesofix, and this is a glue layer with a carrier paper, transfer paper on the back. And this you can use for all sorts of different raw edge appliqué, lots of different uses for that. Then when we move on to the reverse appliqué, we're going to use the H200, which is a lightweight fusible synthetic interfacing, which you can use in all sorts of different either dressmaking or homeware products. And then the final thing that we're going to use is the H640 wadding. This is for the cushion front. So this wadding is a medium weight wadding, but it's very malleable. And the beauty of this is that you have got an adhesive layer on the backing. So it means that if you've got a tricky project or you want to keep the shape of the project really well, then you can fuse it on beforehand. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to make this project in 2 parts. We're going to make the front using the central crash section here. We're going to make that first, and then we're going to put it into the front itself using the reverse appliqué, and then we're going to construct the remainder of the cushion. Okay, so what you'll need, as we said before, you'll be wanting your Solufleece. So you want an 8-inch square of Solufleece. You want 2 8-inch squares of Bondweb, and then you want an 8-inch square of fabric. Now I've got textured fabric here. This is upholstery fabric that I've recycled. I find that if you have something which is synthetic and a little bit unusual in texture, you get some really good results. So that's your central portion taken care of. And then for the remainder of the cushion, you'll want an 8-inch square of the H200. You'll want a 14-inch square of the H640. And you'll want your main body of the cushion fabric, you'll want a 14-inch by 36. So that's 18 and 18. And what we'll do with that is we won't have any seams top and bottom. We'll just be able to envelope it over with using the one side seam. Okay, so we're ready to start our little crash project in the centre. So you have your fabric, which you need to just turn over so you've got the reverse side. You have your Solufleece, and you also have your 2 pieces of the Bondweb. So the first thing that we need to do is remove the backing paper from the Bondweb. And if you just peel it from one corner, you'll see that that comes apart quite nicely. So what you've got here, just get a bit static, is you've got essentially a layer of glue. So lay that on top of your fabric. Do the same thing with the second piece of Bondweb. There we go. And the final part of this little layer is your Solufleece. So you place that on top. Now you can pop a couple of pins in it. And then what we're going to do is take it over to the sewing machine and start doing some sewing stitches to secure this. Okay, so I'm just sewing the layers of the Solufleece, the Bondweb and the fabric together. I'm going for vertical lines. I'm not being too particular about the width between them because I quite like a varied pattern. And if you go for vertical and then I'm going to do horizontal lines, that's the sort of pattern that you'll get, is kind of a ridged pattern. I'm using an 80 weight thread, so quite a lightweight thread, so you won't really see too much of that. If you decided that you didn't want to do a line pattern, you can actually do a free motion, and that's the sort of effect. It's more kind of bubbly. Okay, so we have got our piece now that's got the grid. I've sewn all together. So for the next process, you'll need a hot iron with plenty of steam. But what you're not going to do, you're not going to actually touch the fabric. You're just going to hover above the fabric. This is the magic bit of the process. It's really fun. And can you see those lines are forming? And where I've got a textural fabric, I've got, so the silky satiny bit has actually crinkled more than the piece here. This has got embroidery over the top of the base fabric. You see now how it's coming out. And the more you hold it over, the more effect you get. So we've used a fairly large piece of fabric in the beginning, so it was an 8-inch square. Okay, sorry, too much steam there. But it's actually shrinking it down. So you do just bear in mind, if you are doing a project, that you are going to lose some of the area of the fabric because of all the crinkles. All right, so we're going to just need to put that to one side now and let it cool before we do anything else. Okay, so the next phase of our project is to take the 36 by 14.5 inch fabric, and what we're going to do, if you imagine, we're going to have a central area which will be backed by our H640, so that central area, and then we're going to do an envelope back. So with an envelope back, one side folds up and one side folds down, so you actually can work out the area that you need. So you can just finger press that. Don't get your iron anywhere near this at the moment, because if you've got your H640 in there just judging how big this needs to be, H640 has got the glue on the back, so if you get your iron near it, it's going to melt the glue and stick it to the fabric, which you don't want. So keep your iron away at the moment. So now I've judged how big that center panel is going to be. That's what we're going to work on in a minute. But before we do that, we're going to make sure that we've got a nice clean edge on both of the edges here. So this you'll press, fold down and press approximately 1/4 inch under, 1/4 to 1/2 inch under, and then fold it over again and press all this down, and then pin this. And what we're going to do is just do a little top stitch to secure this down, and do that on both ends. So here we are, ready to sew down the turned over pieces, which are on the end of your long cushion fabric. Okay, so what I like to do is just line up the edge of my foot with the edge of the fold, and then the needle, just make sure the needle is placed maybe around about a scant 1/8 of an inch from the folded edge. Just make sure that that's all in position, and then you can go down and use the side of your foot with the side of the edge there to make it straight. Okay, so that's both end seams done. Now just open out your fabric and have it right sides facing, and what you need to do is, where we approximated our 14-inch panel in the center, so we're using our H640 to do that. So where you've located that at the front, you need to find the center of this now. So you can just simply fold it in half one way and do a little bit of a finger press along, and then fold it in half the other way, matching your two seam fold lines, and that'll locate you the center. So just pop a couple of pins in there for the moment. And the next thing that you'll need, this is your H200. Now one side has got glue, and you can see it's all bobbly, and the other side is smooth. What you want to do is pop it with the glue side upwards, So find your centre on here. We're going to match them together. And this just means that you maximise the amount of fabric that you've got and interfacing that you've got. So there we go. I've got one over the other. I'm just going to secure it around the edges now. So take pins out the centre because you want this to be flat. And just pin it so it's secured, because the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to make a little porthole. So you want something that's approximately 5 inches round to draw a circle in the centre. Okay, so once you've drawn your circle, now what you're going to do is you're going to sew all the way around on the circle. So you're going to sew your H200 has your glue side up, and you're going to sew it to the right side of the fabric. Okay, and the best way I've found to sew a circle, take it fairly steady, start on the point of your circle and just drop your needle down and make sure that it's actually on the line that you've drawn. Clear all your excess fabric away and just gently go around that curve. So when you're making a curve, you'll pull one side down and push the other side up, just very gently, not pulling and pushing as such, but just guiding the fabric around. And if you get a reasonable speed, not too fast, otherwise you'll go off your lines. And obviously the longer pieces at the edges can get in the way, but you see why we put the pins out of the way, because then I don't have to worry where they are in the centre. But you can see now, it will be meet at the edge. Yes, well done. Well done me. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we'll just cut out the centre. So you're going to cut through. We'll start off by just pulling this together and just make a little snip in here, and then we're going to cut out all of that central area. And I'm going to use pinking shears. You don't have to, but if you use pinking shears, if you imagine this is on a curve, the pinking shears will allow things to bend a little bit more. So just cutting out the final bit of the circle. So you've now got, this is your waist, which obviously you can use for something else because you've got a perfectly matched interfacing for that. I'll pop that to one side, and then you have a little porthole in your work now. So the next thing that we're going to do is remove these pins and then turn it through on itself. And as you turn it through, try and make sure that you roll the seam that you've just created so that you've just got a little bit more of your top fabric over your lining fabric, and that will give you a really nice finish when you come to sew around it again. So just go all the way around and ease it around with your fingers. The heat of your hand will press it, so finger pressing is really good here. And I find that if you do this first, when you do the next step, you're not having to worry too much about the edges flipping back. Okay, so I've now pinned the H200 onto the reverse of my cushion front. You see some places it's a little bit bobbly, but I've just made sure that around the central porthole you can just see a piece of the main fabric, so that you know when you've got it laid down on the front that actually you're going to see the main fabric and not the interfacing. So this interfacing, you need a dry iron. You're going to glide the iron across the interfacing for about 12 seconds, and that will allow it to adhere to the fabric. So, and what I'm trying not to do is to get any folds or bumps underneath on the main fabric. So you might have to do a little bit of manipulating. It's not a straightforward iron over the top because you've got a curve. So concentrate on your edges of the curve, and then finish doing this little bit, and then we'll do the insertion of the crash piece. Very exciting. So now we'll take our piece of fabric that we did earlier on with the crashing technique, and we're going to insert it underneath our little porthole and then just pin it in place. And the next thing that we're going to do is just do a little stitch all the way around just to edge it. But you can see, hopefully, that you're not seeing any white of the H200 underneath it. So let's just make sure as well that you've got the areas covered. Depends how rigorous you've been with your crashing. All right, so we'll pin that in place and then we're going to stitch all the way around. Okay, so I've pinned this quite close and I'm now going to just top stitch all the way around, so using this inner edge as my guide. I will increase my stitch because this is quite a thick concentrated piece of fabric now, so I'm going to take mine up to a 3mm, but it's still just on a straight stitch. And again, use your foot to mimic the edge of the fabric so that you can sew it nicely together. Just be a little bit careful that you are catching the fabric underneath. So take it steady to start off with. Do a little back tack and take yourself around. Alright, we're almost round. Let's see how we're doing. So back tack at the end. So just turn it over and make sure that you've got all the circles sewn. And run your finger around the front and just make sure that everything's sewn in place. We're all good to go. Okay, so you've got a choice. You can trim that back piece off if you want to. If you've got, like here, I've got quite a bit more than I need, so I think I'm going to trim that back a little bit. Again, I'll use my pinking shears, but just be careful you don't trim through the front of the fabric as well, otherwise you'll be a bit annoyed with yourself. And you can always use these offcuts in another project because they're quite funky. So if you like doing scrapbooking, journaling, that kind of thing, it's something to keep. I think none of us need any encouragement to keep scrap fabric, do we? Right, there we go. So that's a little bit flatter. So your next process is attaching the H640 underneath. So this is your wadding, so it's nice and bouncy, and what we're going to do is flip over our panel. You can still see where we've got our guidelines on the front, and we're just going to lay over the H640 with the glue side facing the reverse of your fabric. Okay, and then it's back to the iron. Now this, I would iron it from the front, just because I don't want to squash this too much, and the recommendation is 15 seconds on a pressing motion. Okay, so here we are. Everything's fused to the back, and the next thing that we're going to do is just, well, it's entirely up to you, but I quite like the idea of quilting this piece now. So I've made myself a little petal template, and what I'm going to do is just draw some petals with a heat erasable pen around the edge of the circle. Just roughly draw them, because you're going to sew on top. You're going to stitch into them, so you can always adjust things as you stitch around. I find that if I'm trying to draw something and I do it freehand, there's no way it's ever going to be the same. So actually making yourself a little template, and this is the carrier paper from the Bonder Web that I've used, so I always like to reuse, recycle. And this just allows as well the H640 to cool down, because you don't really want to start sewing on it as soon as you've pressed it on. Just let it have a little bit of breathing space before you do that. And I'm going to use a different thread now as well. So I started off with 80 weight thread, and that's what I've been using all the way along. But I'm going to change now to 50 weight. And I've got a variegated, oh look at that, just about right. I've got a variegated thread. So hopefully it adds a little bit more texture to this piece as well. Okay, so we're just coming up to our final piece of a petal now. And I chose to use a swing stitch on here. So although I was kind of vaguely following my lines that I drew, there was a bit of liberty taken. And always do, when you're doing any applique on the front or any sewing on the front of a piece, always do a lock stitch. So you can see we've got a variegated thread going along there. It's quite pretty, but it gives you that sort of bounce effect. So it's quite nice to have it quilted. But the next part of the process is to make the envelope back. So what we're going to do is fold over the pieces that we sewed under before. Just get rid of a few of those threads. So see where the edge of your H640 is, fold it up to that edge, or maybe just a few millimeters, so that it's it covers over that edge, and then fold over the top. Now when you're doing an envelope back, so it doesn't matter on this one because the pattern is the same, but if you were doing it and you had a pattern that needed to be one way up to be the top, then the piece that you fold down first is going to be your outer piece. So for example, this one, if I fold that on top, when I've opened everything up, this will be my best piece. So for example, if you were going to put a trim on here or lace or something like that, that's the piece that you'd want to fold down first. So make sure everything lines up and you've got the edges, everything's straight. So this is the important one to be straight, because that's the one you'll see. The other one you won't see so much. So make sure you've got everything lined up, and that should be, now by the time we've done all our seams and everything, that should be a 14-inch square. And then what you're going to do is you're going to sew along both of these edges. So you want to do probably a ½ inch seam along here and sew down both sides, and then we'll complete the cushion. Okay, final piece of the seam. Finish off, and that's both side seams done. Neaten up your work, and then we're going to turn it through. So let's turn our corners. So pop your thumb right into the edge of the corner, pop your finger over to the other side and pinch that through. So turn your far corners first, and that will give you a nice square corner. There we go. That's ready for just to iron, press the front, and then it's ready for a cushion pad. Thanks for watching along, everyone. This is your finished project. So this is the one I did earlier with the free motion crash in the center, and then this is the one that we did just now with the cross hatching. So I hope you've enjoyed using the Vlieseline products. My name's Jules Mayouf, and I hope to see you again soon.